What's up everyone, how are you all? Today we are back with another blazing Naruto story. What if Naruto x Assassin's Creed Odyssey? If you enjoy then please like, share and do comments. And also check the description to original creator of this beautiful creation. The deck of the ship was for the most part busy with activity as the crew set the ship's rigging as they came in upon the small island nation of Wave Country which contained their newest mission. On the command and navigation deck a young man in a long black woolen jacket that seemed to end just below his waist and what looked like a set of bird wings. He had a fox-like design on the side of his coat as walked up and pulled out a telescope to see the island for himself. Right at this moment a young woman in form-fitting clothes with medium-length red hair and glasses walked up to him to give her report. It's just as we feared, cousin, he has control of every shipping port on the island. We are going to have to go ashore with the longboats to remain undetected. He then closed the telescope and then handed it to her. He then turned to her and motioned for her to follow him down to the main deck of the ship. His hair was a bright blonde that seemed to be kissed by the sun itself and piercing blue eyes that seemed to be one with the sea as you looked into them. But it was the whisker-like marks on his cheeks that had given him his exotic looks from the beginning and had also given him the nickname of Black Fox as he was fond of wearing black with a little dark orange here and there. Well, if that's the case, cousin, we will just have to pay this gato a little visit now, won't we? She gave him a nod of her head and pushed her glasses up and then began to bark orders out to the many sailors manning the ship as he then entered his cabin and began to finish his outfitting of his own equipment. He instantly put on his belt around the jacket as well as his sword strap and began to arm himself as soon as possible. He then picked up a strange-looking katana and placed it in his scabbard and then flexed his wrists, revealing his hidden blades that were as black as night itself and many other impressive weapons that he had at his disposal, and then turned to a picture showing his life before all this happened to him. With this said and done, he quickly walked out of his private cabin, pulling up the black hood that kept his identity secret from so many, and walked back up to the helm of the ship. All of the men and women that manned the ship all had reasons for being aboard his vessel known as the Black Vixen, what many call one of the most dangerous pirate ships in the elemental nations. They were here to restore their homeland and its way of life that had been stolen from them so long ago. Not only was their nation that of mighty sailors and merchants, but they were also the warriors of an ancient order too, and for you see they were the last of the Assassin Brotherhood. Tsunami screamed out as she was thrown from her home by one of Gato's mercenaries. Two of them had quickly run up and grabbed her by her arms, not caring how she felt, and a third emerged carrying her son by the back of his t-shirt. She then heard one of them say, "The boss said we only need the woman, so what should we do with this little shrimp here?" But before any of them could even say a word, the one holding the child was struck in the head by an unknown object that was preceded by a loud bang. His comrades watched in shock as his body hit the ground hard with a tail of crimson liquid in the air. Before they could even register what had occurred, the man on the right was also shot right between the eyes and fell back, hitting the ground very hard. The last remaining enemy then heard two more loud bangs and then felt sharp pain in both of his knees and hit the ground screaming as he saw what looked to be many men and women walking out of the forest that was not that far from the house. He then looked up to see one of the men holding a rather strange-looking weapon and turned to a hooded man with an orange outlined fox on his side of his coat and then said, "Just as you requested, Captain, he's still alive for interrogation." The fox nodded to him and then walked forward and brought his foot down hard on one of the injured man's knees, forcing him to scream out in agony. He then came down to face the man and said in a commanding voice, "Tell me, do you fear death?" The man could only nod his head as Naruto then said, "Good, then you can tell me what I want to now, because if you don't you'll learn just what happens to men like you who try to murder innocent women and children in our presence." The man then quickly spoke in a pleading type of tone, "Please don't kill me, I was just following orders." "And what, pray tell, would those orders be?" "We were ordered by our boss Gato to capture the bridge builder's daughter and his grandson and bring them to him to be used as hostages against the old man, as well as to kill the two ninjas that he hired and the ones protecting the old man as well," the man said, pleading for his life as the Black Fox looked down upon him. Naruto then removed his foot from the man's knee and walked over to the woman and asked of her, "Where would your father be today, my lady, so we might be able to save him?" Despite what many people might have thought of Tsunami, she was well versed in the world, including who this young mysterious man was, and felt absolutely no fear from him and pointed in the direction and then spoke, "He's at the bridge now with the two Konoha ninja teams he hired to protect him." Naruto simply nodded his head to her and turned to his crew and began dishing out orders. Get back to the Vixen right now and get her to the bridge right away and await my orders once you get there and hide in the fog." The crew nodded and began their way back to the ship. However, one of them quickly took out a gun and killed the would-be kidnapper to prevent him from being a threat in the future to any more innocent people. The crew turned back to watch their captain literally run up a tree and disappear into the foliage, realizing that things were going to get very interesting very soon, and then began to run back to the ship as fast as they could. Inari looked up to his mother and asked her, "Who was that, mother?" That the son was the captain of the Black Vixen. He's known to many as the Black Fox, and I don't pity Gato one bit. So, this is how it ends for me and Haku. Zabuza thought to himself as he saw the copycat ninja himself Kakashi Hitaki coming in for the kill, only to watch someone catch the copycat's hand within inches of piercing his and Haku's flesh, and then got a good look at this person and said, "It's been a long time, Fox." "It has it not, Zabuza?" Kakashi was now very concerned with the appearance of an S-ranked ninja and notorious pirate who was said to be at least a cage level in many people's views. The dogs holding Zabuza in place eventually disappeared, allowing the former swordsman of the mist to move again. He took one look at Fox and knew why he had come in the first place, and then said to Kakashi, "We are no longer enemies, Hitaki." Kakashi was then released by the Black Fox, who then watched the young man walk right past the two mist ninjas and then look at the retreating fog to see none other than Gato and his mercenary army waiting for them. Gato had a shit-eating grin and arrogance look upon his face as he looked at the group of shinobi before him and decided to taunt them a bit. "I'm so glad I was never going to pay you, Zabuza. After all, it's far cheaper just to have my army here do it than pay you all that money." It was right at this moment that Gato heard a rather disturbing laughter as a man in black clothing with a hood walked forward and then said for all the mercenaries as well as their employer to hear, "Tell me, Gato, do you fear death?" Gato didn't know what to think about this strange young man, but then was more surprised to hear shaking coming from one of his mercenaries and turned to look at men. "I'm not paying you to just stand there and shake in your boots. I order you to go kill that," the pathetic young man. However, Gato was unprepared for what the mercenary said next. "Please, Captain Black Fox, don't kill me. I'll leave. I didn't mean no harm to these people." "Then leave. I know you fear death." After the fox said this for all to hear, the mercenary in question tore through the rest of the mercenaries trying to get out of the area, remembering what had happened with his last encounter with the Black Fox and his ship and the carnage that followed it. Several of the other mercenaries had heard him talk about what had happened a few years earlier when he thought he could take on the notorious pirate known only as the Black Fox, and that he said he would run for his life and that they should do the same if they did not want to be killed by this man who many have said had been gifted by Davy Jones himself. And everything the man had said to them about this notorious pirate was starting to make some sense as he walked forward and then motioned off the bridge to what looked like a large fog bank sitting off in the distance from the bridge, only to watch a large black pirate ship come out of it and turn to its side bearing all its guns upon the mercenaries. Gato's eyes went wide, realizing that this young man was indeed someone who needed to be afraid of, as the Black Fox then brought up his left arm and dropped it, pointing out the mercenary army and their employer, and shouted for all to hear, "Fire!" Within a second, the Black Vixen opened fire upon the bridge area containing the midget and his mercenary army, killing many of them in the first volley. Kakashi Kurenai and their teams, including the 3 young members of their squads who had been knocked out by Haku earlier, now watched the preceding battle, or slaughter if you wanted to call it that. The mercenaries were now in total shock as the famous pirate ship known as the Black Vixen cut them down without even a care in the world, and when the main cannons did not fire because of the reloading process, the ship's snipers up in the rigging and the crow's nest took shots, hitting many of the mercenaries directly in the head. Several, however, managed to get out of the main killing area and ran right at the Black Fox himself, hoping to end him once and for all. Naruto quickly activated his hidden blades, which were as black as night with gold inlay images of foxes, and went to work cutting the mercenaries down with little to no effort, realizing that they had very little experience taking on someone who was trained by the most notorious shinobi, pirates and privateers who were just seeking to clear their name as well as his bloodline, which gave him all of his ancestors' memories and skills, including the more notorious ones who were also assassins and pirates. Sasuke could only watch in utter shock at this pirate's skill level and those strange weapons he had on his arms, which made him even more deadly, and wanted this power for himself. At the moment, however, he was more of a burden to his team as well as to his aspirations and desires for revenge. He could only watch the battle at this time and was thankfully he had activated his shireen and was committing everything that he saw to memory for later use in his training and ultimately to be used in his revenge. Gato had never been more scared in his life. One moment he thought he was in absolute control of the situation, and the next he was hiding behind part of the bridge hoping that none of the shots from the cannons would hit him, and even used some of his men's body as a shield to protect him as he heard screaming and then saw one of his men fly forward with his head missing, only to see the head hit the ground a few feet from him a second later. The black fox then walked forward with his hand on his sword, lightly tapping the hilt as he walked forward to finally end the small businessman. Just then one of the surviving mercenaries had gotten up and had managed to grab hold of the black fox's hood and pulled it back, only to receive a bullet to his head thanks to the reflexes of this pirate. Gato at this moment began to try to run away, only to receive a bullet to his leg, forcing him to fall to the ground for his efforts. He then began to try and crawl away, hoping to escape, only to feel a foot slam down upon his injured leg. He then looked up to see none other than the same young man who had been insulted by him and began to plead for his wretched life. "Please, I'll give you whatever you want, just spare my life." The fox just laughed at him and then said, "Have you forgotten about the stories, Gato? I'm a heartless wretch to someone like you." With that said, he quickly pulled out his gun once more and shot the miserable midget several times and emptied the clip in the process. As soon as this was done, he holstered his weapon and walked over to Zabuza and Haku, only to hear a gas come from the one-eyed leaf ninja. It was at this moment that he remembered that his hood had been pulled down and let out a small curse, as he then turned to the leaf ninjas, who seemed to be trying to come to grips with what they were seeing. Seeing as, he quickly turned his head to Haku and said, "I hope you have some chakra left, love. I would really like to get out of here without them trying catch me." She quickly nodded her head and opened a huge ice mirror, which the three then jumped right through before Kakashi could even make it to the spot to try to knock them out, only to see the mirror appear on the deck of the Black Vixen with the three of them walking out. One of the crew members then walked up to Naruto and handed him a black hat with a top red line about it. He then walked to the railing of the ship for the Konoha ninjas to see and hear him, as he then shouted for all to hear, "I would say it was a pleasure seeing you again, Cyclops, but that would be a lie. Just know that you had a chance to capture Captain Naruto Uzumaki." Kurenai had also run to the edge of the bridge and could only wonder out loud, "That has got to be the best pirate I have ever seen, Kakashi." He turned to look at her with a somewhat angry look about him and said, "You have no idea how important he is, Kurenai. We need answers about him, otherwise we will be in the dark about him forever." Kakashi then walked up to Tazuna and asked him, "Is there a pub for sailors here in the village?" "Yes, there is. I can take you to it later if you want." "Thank you, we'll go later today. First things first, though, I need everyone to help us get them back to the house immediately. Sakura, Hinata, get as many of those needles out as you can out of them right now so we can get them back to the house, where you two can remove the rest later." The two young girls simply nodded and got to work, as they both heard Sasuke muttered something about wanting that power. Sometime later that evening, Tazuna led them to the pub, which was called the Deep Blue Pub. As soon as the two ninjas entered the pub, they heard many men and women singing a sea shanty song that went something like this: "Yo ho, a pirate's life for me." They then noticed one old sailor with a black beard drinking some rum with a wooden leg, who Tazuna immediately brought them over to take one look at the ninjas and smiled as Tazuna then introduced them. "Allow me to introduce you to Captain Holloway. Captain, allow me to introduce you to Hidden Leaf Ninjas Kakashi and Kurenai." The old sea salt then just smiled at them and motioned for them to sit down, as he then said, "I know why you're all here. You want to know about him? You want to know about the Black Fox?" They nodded their heads as he laughed a little bit and then said, "I was a pirate once, you know, and I thought myself the most feared man but fair who ever sailed these waters, but this young man." He then poured all of them a bit of rum and then continued with his story. "He was the one who saved me and sent me here. It was time I retired anyway, but it's what I saw him do to those slavers who worked for the people made us all pirates in the first place. I saw him single-handedly clear the deck of a water country ship, saving the doomed souls aboard and killing the people any in his path. They say the legendary goddess herself, Calypso, and the spirit of Davy Jones himself blessed the Black Fox with amazing powers and the contract to some amazing creatures that once roamed the seas." By this point the entire pump had stopped whatever they had been doing and listened to the story of the Black Fox, as the old salt took another drink and then continued, "I saw him fighting like the devil himself, cutting them down with absolutely no problem or mercy, and when we found out that he was from that clan and nation, we knew just how dangerous he was going to be. And he's a cunning one, oh yes, he knows his way around the elemental seas better than anyone." Kakashi, as well as everyone else, was listening very intent as the old man then started his story once more after taking another drink. It's even said that he has the respect of the seven swordsmen themselves. So if it's fortune and fame you seek as well as freedom from our oppressors, then Captain Naruto Uzumaki is your man. Just a word of warning to you all, don't meddle in his private affairs, for there is more mystery to that man than even I dare ask. Zabuza walked the deck of the Black Vixen with a sense of hope for the first time after hearing from Naruto that the civil war was finally over and those responsible had been dealt with accordingly. He was also happy to hear that his old friend Mei had become the new water shadow of the Hidden Mist village. Zabuza Momochi, the master of the executioner blade, simply looked up at that moment as the mighty black ship moved through the sea on its way back to its hidden harbor and from there on to what was left of the three once great naval powers that had protected so many lives. But now because of the greed of men they were reduced to nothing more than pirates, but their enemies would regret that since it was through this action that they would retain their freedom and honor and the power as well to set the world right again in the process. He then saw his adoptive daughter Haku walk up alongside him and speak to him. Have you ever been to this shipwreck cove as they call it? He turned and looked her right in the eyes as he then said, once a long time ago, back then it was just a hidden military base that the three great naval powers used, but now it's one of our few hopes to save our way of life. She then looked up to the bridge to see the young pirate lord and decided to ask another question. How do you know that pirate lord up there, father, and is he really as terrifying as they say? He smiled underneath his bandages and then said, well, he's much like myself when it comes to his friends, but if you're an enemy he lacks my merciful nature and sense of fair play as well as a good temper. I met him when he just started his training to use that sword of his, which is said to have been created by the same swordsmith who created the blades for our little group. This surprised Haku as she had been told how rare a sword made by that man were and was surprised to say the least, and they had only been made for the seven swordsmen of the mist. I was unaware that he made more than just the seven. Well, my daughter, he also made all the blades that the pirate lords themselves used. Of this little group here there are 7 of them as well, but Naruto would have gotten one anyways considering who and what he is. You mean because he's an Uzumaki and an assassin? She asked her father as she watched the pirate lord go about his duties as the young redhead and the other young man walked up to him. Zabuza could only let out a laugh as he heard this question and then said, well, you're half right, but believe me, he still had to earn that blade of his. But let me ask you something, daughter, do you have a crush on him? She blushed at her adoptive father had said to her, you're not helping. Naruto walked up to the ship's railing and looked out upon the sea in utter amazement as he saw the moonlight dance upon the surface of the water. He then heard noises strictly behind them, turned to see his cousin Karen and first mate Suigetsu. He turned to his cousin and they said, I didn't think they were going to find out who I was so fast. Suigetsu rolled his eyes and then said in a shark-like grin, thinks to his teeth, well, as you're so fond of saying, fox, nothing ever lasts. Karen in all of her red-headed glory just slapped him in the back of the head, turning it into water from the impact. She then turned to her cousin and said, yeah, but they're ninjas not pirates, so I didn't think they know very much about you anyways, and let's face it, you're quite notorious for escapes and getting out of a very sticky situations. Naruto could only roll his eyes at their antics as he heard Karen speak once more, but seriously, I have to ask you a question. What happens if you gain the opportunity to go back to the Hidden Leaf and it's not for a job? He gave her a smile and then said for everyone to hear him, oh, you know me, cousin, I love those moments. I like to wave at them as they pass by them and give them the bird, if you get my meaning. She once again was surprised by his words and hit him in the back of the head as well. It went down to her private cabin to rest for the night and to await the morning shift. He then rubs the back of his head and picks up his hat and then turns to Suigetsu. Well, you are in command and the ship is yours until morning. Oh, and one more thing, if you damage my ship I'm going to kill you. Suigetsu, needless to say, quickly took a hold of the wheel like his life depended on it, which despite what many people might think it really did, as he had learned to fear the Black Fox and his cousin in these kinds of situations from first-hand experience. Naruto then entered his main cabin and shut the door behind him. The Black Vixen's captain's cabin was not too big but was more than enough for one. In fact, it was big enough for him and at least 7 people to live quite comfortable. The crew had seen the ship become his home no matter what anyone would say to him, as his life was now one with the sea itself. He walked back to his desk and pulled the chair out to sit down and then removed his hat and placed it upon the desk, which was full of charts of the elemental nations. He then picked up a bottle of rum and took a quick drink and then looked at a picture of a young blonde-haired boy and a red-headed woman with green eyes and felt a bit of pain at what he was seeing and that he had worked so hard to put behind him but could not forget what had been done to them both. As he reached over to pick up the picture and he accidentally hit the small crab-shaped music box his mother had given him and listened to the song being played by it and felt his emotions take hold, including a single tear from his right eye, which he then touched it, bringing the small tear of salty water on his finger to see with his own eyes, and began to feel both pain and anger at the people who had taken so much from him in the first place. Haku finally worked up the courage to go talk to Suigetsu about the Black Fox. The former apprentice of the 7 swordsmen of the mist turned to look at her as she walked up to him and gave a shark-like smile. "So what's on your mind?" She gave him one of those looks and then spoke. "I was just curious about Naruto, or as you all call him, the Black Fox. What can you tell me about him?" Suigetsu was a little taken aback by her question but decided to give her some information. "I can only tell you so much." "Well, how did you and that red-headed girl end up on this ship for starters, and how did he become what he is, and is he really so terrifying as people say?" Haku asked him. Suigetsu let out a small laugh and then began to tell her a somewhat abridged story. "I can tell you some things but not everything, okay?" She nodded to him as he then continued. "From what I know, he was 6 years old when something terrible happened to him in his home village that set him on this path. Some family friends who are very powerful, I might add, managed to get him out of that village and get him to his ancestral home." "You mean the Whirlpool village?" "I will neither confirm nor deny which village, but anyways, moving on. Once he got there, he began to training in the ways of the shinobi and eventually discovered his nation's unique maritime history, including this ship, which he began to repair and refit so that it could sail once more. He also possesses some kind of bloodline that allows him to relive his ancestors' memories, including 2 of them who were notorious pirates in their days." Haku looked surprised at what Suigetsu had just told her and asked a question. "So he was experiencing his ancestors' memories?" "Oh, not just experiencing them but also gaining their skills as well. From the stories I've heard, by the time he was 10 years old he was already a master seaman and have trained in his other ancestral roots." She looked out upon the ship and then asked him her next question. "So how did you get involved with him?" He gave a small laugh as he made a course correction and then spoke. "That's an interesting story in its own right, so I'll give you an abridged version. Basically, he was already a pirate lord when he pulled up on one of Orochimaru's secret laboratories where me and Karen were being held against our will, and in my case already been experimented upon." He saw the look of shock upon her face and then continued his story. "What the snake wasn't counting on that day was that Black Fox decided to pay him a visit and then rescued not only me and Karen but also a young girl named Isaribi, in an even bigger surprise when he met his sister who had been kidnapped before he was even born by the snake Sanin." Haku was no surprised to hear this even more and realized that if she was going to get to know him better she would have to go through his family to do it. "He has a sister?" "Oh yeah, he does. Just wait till you meet her. We will be at Shipwreck Cove in a couple of days and then you'll get to meet her firsthand." As soon as they were sure that their client was safe and sound from any more danger, the 2 Jonin and their squads quickly made their way back to their home village to give their report on what happened on the bridge. Kakashi had sent word ahead of them to prepare an emergency meeting with the Hokage and councils. One of the Anbu standing guard quickly opened the doors for them as they then entered the room to the council meeting for them and motioned them in with some urgency. The 2 Jonin senseis quickly entered the room as the door was shut behind them and gave a slight bow to the Hokage, or Fire Shadow as he was known to others, and began to give their report upon what had happened. The council of Konoha for the most part was surprised that such a simple mission had become so dangerous for a newly made genin squad that also happened to include the Uchiha clan heir as well as another team that had to be dispatched to act as backup. But when Kurenai began to explain the confrontation on the bridge and just who had interfered, they were now on the edge of their seats and quite concerned. Kakashi was in the process of using his signature jutsu, the Chidorel, to eliminate our opponent, a ranked threat level shinobi Zabuza Momochi, who was at this time contained until a person managed to stop Kakashi dead in his tracks just a few inches from both Zabuza and his young apprentice. We were able to identify this individual as the notorious pirate or privateer known as the Black Fox. Many of the civilians who were merchants were shocked to hear this, as their shipping companies have had run-ins with this man and only 2 of them who had done illegal things had reason to fear him, whereas the others were quite happy for his help since the water country navy had become more pirate than those they called pirate in the first place. The Shinobi Council knew that there was much more to come and that it would be something that would make this room just explode in noise and arguments amongst everyone, including the civilians. The ninja didn't have to wait long as Kurenai then continued with her report. Zabuza's former employer at this time was the shipping tycoon Gato, who had decided to not pay him and ordered his execution as well as our own until one of the mercenaries recognized the Black Fox and pleaded for his life. However, Gato still did not believe that this was the pirate lord that he should be afraid of. They listened to everything she had to say with bated breath. Then the Black Fox's vessel appeared out of the fog bank off the bridge and opened fire upon the mercenaries, killing almost all of them. Several, however, did manage to engage the pirate lord and were quickly dispatched without even one of them able to touch him, except for this one man that grabbed a hold of his hood and pulled it down, which allowed us to later identify him, but not before he was able to finish off Gato. Everyone was listening to her story intently now and became more curious about who this pirate was. He then turned around to confront Zabuza and his apprentice, and only for us to become aware of his identity at that time. Kakashi was able to properly identify him as one Naruto Uzumaki. As soon as she said this, the room exploded in noise as everyone began to argue or talk amongst themselves. After just a minute, the third Hokage had enough of the arguing and made his presence known thanks to his ki and shouted for all to hear, "Enough." The third then turned his head as to the two Jonin and spoke in a calm but commanding voice that only the village leader could produce. "You are positive that you have discovered the Uzumaki heir potential location and what activities he is now pursuing?" "Yes, sir," she said. "Has word of this gotten out to the village yet?" The third asked them, only to see them both looked at each other. The father of Ino then realized why they had looked at each other and spoke his mind. "You have Sakura Haruno on your team, don't you?" Kakashi could only nod as they then heard the third Hokage say, "Shit." The Willow Tree Tavern in the Hidden Leaf village of Konoha was considered by many to be the most popular dining establishment and place of rest for the shinobi after a long mission. The Rookie Nine, as they were known, were together for the first time in weeks. Hinata and her teammate Kiba were busy bringing over several drinks and food to the table where the rookies and one member of Team Guy were currently seated. The member of Team Guy was none other than the only female member and weapons expert named Tenten. As the two sat down and passed out the food and drinks to everyone gathered, they then heard Ino start asking her questions. "Okay, Forehead, what happened out there? I mean, you were supposed to be going on a C-rank mission and then their team is sent out, and I hear rumors it's like up to what now, like a B rank now?" Sakura was surprised that the rumors were somewhat true, but decided that her and Kiba would set the record straight on their unique mission. "Actually, it's more like an A- rank pig. I think me and Kiba should just tell you all what happened on the mission." Everyone else got comfy as the two began to tell their tale, starting with Sakura. "Well, it all started with a simple C-rank escort mission that we were sent on to escort a master bridge builder back to his home village in Wave Country. After a day, we eventually saw this puddle sitting in the middle of the road and realized it had not rained for a while. Everyone was thinking the same thing, genjutsu. And then these two missing nin suddenly just jumped right out of the puddle and went on the attack. At first we thought they had killed Kakashi-sensei and then went after the client. Fortunately for him, Sasuke and Sai managed to prevent them from getting to the client, and then it was revealed that our sensei had in fact faked his own death and then took them out fast, and then discovered what was really going on. Choji had become quite interested by their story and could not wait any longer, and then? She then continued her story. "Well, we found out that our client had lied about the details of the mission and that it was in fact much more serious than we had first expected it to be. We all agreed to continue the mission, but Kakashi-sensei sent for backup to arrive at the village only a little bit after we did." Everyone in the pub was now listening to the story with curiosity about what would happen next. So anyways, by the next day we finally made it to the island containing the village and were attacked by a mist ninja known as Zabuza. As soon as she said this, she heard people mumbling and talking amongst themselves, and then saw the look on Tenten's face as she then said, "Your sensei fought one of the 7 swordsmen of the mist, and from what I've heard, one of the most dangerous members they ever had." Sakura just nodded her head as everyone became even more curious and listened and even more intently as she continued. "Yeah, they fought like hell, and eventually it looked like Zabuza was going to win as he had managed to capture Kakashi-sensei in a jutsu called the Water Prison. But luckily Sasuke and Sai put an emergency plan in action and managed to set him free." The shinobi in the tavern were actually quite impressed by the teamwork of the two genin to save their sensei. Sakura then took a drink and continued her story. With that done, sensei then managed to defeat Zabuza, but before he could deliver the final blow to finish him off, we were interrupted by a fake hunter nin who put him in a false death-like state. After they disappeared, it was revealed that sensei had used up a lot of his chakra. We had to carry him to the client's house and hope for the reinforcements that had been sent, for which is where Kiba's story starts. Everyone turned from her to the young man and his dog, who then took a quick drink and started his part of the story. We arrived the next day to discover that there, since he had just regained consciousness and informed us that the threat was still alive and would probably re-engage us within a week. Both of our teachers ordered immediate training to prepare for the showdown. Tenten was now very interested about what was going to happen, as if she had dreamed when she was older about taking on one of the 7 swordsmen of the mist or even one of the 7 pirate lords. Kiba then took a bite of some of the food and another drink and continued with the story. So for that entire week we trained as hard as we could, but as it turns out we made one critical mistake when the week was up. One of the ninjas in the bar then had to ask him what it was. What was the mistake? We didn't think that the client's family was in any danger, but they were. If it wasn't for the appearance of the black fox, they probably would have been killed. As soon as he finished saying this, he saw just about everyone in the tavern was now looking at him with their mouths wide open, their eyes as big as dinner plates. One of the ninjas in the room shouted for all to hear, "They met one of the most notorious pirates and lived?" The 2 teams that had gone to Wave Country were still trying to learn as much as they could about the fox. Yes, he saved them. Now by this point Misasake and Sai had gone up against the fake hunter Nin, who had some weird bloodline that made these weird ice mirrors, and I might add kicked our asses good, while her sensei engaged Zabuza once more and was about to end him until the black fox popped up and stopped him dead in its tracks. Everyone was in shock at what they had just learned, but if you think that's weird, then get this. Zabuza's employer, a guy named Gato, then appeared at the other side of the bridge with a small army of mercenaries and basically betrayed them. However, he underestimated the fox, who then pointed off the bridge at this big black ship with black sails, just came right out of this fog bank, and with one order from this guy opened up on the mercenary army, killing almost all of them in the process, and those who managed to get out of the killing zone went right at the fox, only for him to activate these strange blades on his arms and cut them down without even a thought. The room was so silent now you could hear a pin drop to the ground. Now one of them did manage to pull down this black hood he had on, but that didn't even slow them down. As he walked up to Gato, took out this strange weapon, shot him in his leg, and walked up to him again, taunted him, and killed him right there for everyone to see. Sakura then decided to continue the story, but that's not all. As soon as he turned back to talk to Zabuza, our sensei let out a gasp as he recognized who the black fox was and even attempted to take him down, but he escaped him thanks to those weird mirrors again, and then reappeared on the deck of the ship. He then shouted for all of us to hear, "You almost captured Captain Naruto Uzumaki." The sounds of items hitting the ground like beer mugs surprised all of them as they looked about the room and everyone who was present. However, it was Tenten who broke the silence. "Are you kidding me?" They were surprised by her statement as she then continued, "You're telling us that one of the most dangerous, powerful and notorious pirate lords is from this village and has been missing for over a decade?" Ino and her team were surprised by this bit of information as Tenten then continued, "If what you say is the truth, then this village and country will stop at nothing to get their hands on him again. I mean, he's pretty much a noble and is the heir to an entire country." The rookies then heard older ninjas not that far from them then say, "I don't blame the kid for running away from this village. After all, when your only family is killed right in front of you and the village does absolutely nothing to give you justice, would you want to stay here?" A lot of the ninjas quickly paid their bills and ran out of the pub to spread the word about what they had just heard. The Black Vixen had just pulled into the main docking area of Shipwreck Cove. Haku and Zabuza were absolutely impressed with what they had seen so far as the ship pulled into its dock, only to look on out upon the bay, shocked to see 3 man-of-wars with the water country emblems on them, but also the emblem of the resistance upon them as well, and realized that Mei was undoubtedly here waiting for them. The 2 of them then followed Naruto, his cousin, and Suigetsu off the ship and into a rather busy-looking tavern that was called the Red Sailor. The tavern was so active that it had 3 bouncers who looked like they have seen several wars. But the moment they saw Naruto and his entourage, they let them pass without a fuss and even nodded to them in a show of respect and then went back to their jobs. As they entered the tavern, a young red-headed woman then motioned for them to follow her up some stairs that were also being guarded. Zabuza and Haku were actually shocked to see Mei and the new daimyo of Water Country sitting at a table with 3 other people who Naruto instantly recognized and walked over to them along with the young red-headed woman. The Mei then said, "Well, I see we still have 4 living mariner lords among us, and I see that the old fox has brought you back to us, Zabuza." Zabuza nodded his head to her and then said, Well, I'm just happy that you sent him to get me in time for me and my apprentice here would have holes in our chest right now. Mei gave a smile and turned her head to look Naruto right in the eyes and then said, "Nice work, Fox. But I'm afraid there is more I must ask of you and the others here as well." This caught Naruto's attention as she then continued. Now, as you may or may not be aware, the Chunin exams will be held in the Hidden Leaf Village within the next 9 days, and I would like for you and your 2 officers here as well as another team to enter the exam under the flag of the Hidden Mist Village to represent both us and Water Country as a whole. The red-headed woman and the 4 Mariner Lords, or Pirate Lords as the rest of the world had come to call them, just looked at her as if her head was off her body. At first she didn't know what to think about their reactions, as they were all quiet with their mouths open until all 5 of them started to point their fingers at her in an accusing manner and saying things that went against her plan. From both Naruto and the red-headed woman, who was revealed to be his older sister, Tayuya said, "Are you out of your damn mind?" The next lord to speak out was none other than Jack Webb. "Why the hell are you sending him into that hellhole of a village, and for what?" The next was a woman with a simple outfit on that looks like it would prove effective against cold weather but not a hindrance in warmer weather. Her name was Minerva the Ice Queen. "I will not let you sacrifice one of us for your damn plan, woman." The final lord was a dark-skinned woman with white face paint over the top of her face that brought out a skull-like appearance but still revealed her absolute beauty, with long flowing black hair and a unique hat on her head. She was known as Lady Rouge, the Voodoo Queen of Lightning. "Can we just shoot this woman right now and be done with it for her stupid and crazy idea?" Now, while Mei was feared by just about everyone and could basically intimidate any man with a simple smile and a sweet word about their death, but she was absolutely terrified by the Mariner Lords because she could not intimidate them at all. She had expected some of this to occur and had to explain her plan to them to get them to side with her as well as to finish while she was here in Shipwreck Cove. Now all of you allow me to explain why I have asked Naruto and his crew to do this, but first. She then walked over to the table and brought out the remains of a sword which get all of their attention, including Tayuya's. "Before I can explain my plan to you all, I have to perform my duty here." They instantly recognized the blade as belonging to one of their fallen lords. He chose you, Tayuya, to be the next Mariner Lord to take his place as the Lord of the Crescent Moon Sea. The 4 current Mariner Lords motioned for her to follow them as they exited the tavern and then walked a bit to a small blacksmith shop that seemed to be quite revered by the many people present. They then motioned for Tayuya to enter along with Mei, who was still holding the broken blade in its box. The man inside the shop stepped forward and picked up the handle part of the sword and then put it in Tayuya's hands, only to see it glowing bright, burning her hand in the process. At the same time the hilt of the blade burned her hand. The other 4 Mariner Lords felt their own marks burned just as it had when they had been made Lords of the Seas. The old blacksmith motioned for his apprentice to come forward and then said to her, "The previous Lord and the blade have chosen you and find you worthy to wield this blade and the responsibilities, but because it is broken it must be made new, and I will require something you hold dear to make the blade anew." Tayuya reached into her pocket and pulled out her first flute, which had been given to her by her mother. It was gold and silver with the whirlpool symbol embedded in it, and handed it over to the smith, who then nodded to her and went to work. The Mariner Lords listened to the sounds of the blacksmith as well as the 7 swordsman member was present, as this man or myth was the one responsible for their blade's creation and maintenance, and knew that his apprentice would also follow in this man's footsteps. After a few hours the smith returned with a brand new blade and a set of hidden blades made from the broken remnants of the last Mariner Lord. Tayuya took hold of the blade and held it up for all to see. The hilt had a small flute built into it, as the blade was in perfect silver with a crescent moon built into it. It seemed to radiate the light of the moon itself, as the other Mariner Lords each revealed their own blades and each said, "I, Captain Jack Webb, Lord of the Waters Country Coast, hereby recognize you as one of us." The next was a woman who looked ready for cold weather. "I, Minerva, Lord of the Snow Seas, recognizes you as one of us." Then it was the next girl's turn. "I, Lady Rouge of the Lightning Seas, hereby recognizes you as one of us." Then it was her brother's turn to speak. "I, Naruto Uzumaki, Lord of the Whirlpool Seas, hereby recognizes you as one of his sister." She held the blade and got a good look at it, as well as putting on the blades of her assassin heritage, and then said for all those present to hear, "I, Tayuya Uzumaki, hereby accept the position of Mariner Lord of the Crescent Moon Seas." All 5 of them then sheathed their swords and turned to Mei, who then motioned for them to follow her, as she then said, "Now that that is done, at least let me explain why I need your help in this matter. Who knows, you might actually enjoy it." May had poured herself a drink and then turned to the mariner lords and began to explain everything. Now, as you are all aware, the war cost us all greatly in the long run. The council and myself have decided that we need to make a good impression to potential clients, and the only place to do that quickly is in the Chunin exams, which are being held in the Hidden Leaf. Naruto had just taken a shot of rum and then said, I can understand your desire to impress potential clients, but why the hell do you need us? May could only roll her eyes at his comment, because out of the entire mariner lords that I know of, you and many of your crew are the only ones with significant shinobi training. Lady Rouge nodded her head at this. Okay, that I can understand, but why is it so important to send them in? Glad you asked that one, Rouge. It's because he is the only one here who knows the village inside and out. May said to them as she pointed at Naruto. Naruto and his two female relatives looked at each other and then back at May as he then said, okay, what the hell is going to happen? Well, as you know, ever since you basically kicked the snake Sanin right in the balls, he's been basically building up his forces and, as you know, plotting his revenge against the Hidden Leaf as well as Fire Country. She finished saying and then noticed all of them looking at each other. The Chunin exams, they all said at the same time. The water daimyo had for the most part been quiet but now had to just say something. Okay guys, that was just creepy the way you all did that. Tayuya just smiled as she then said, it looks like we finally get our chance to give a little payback to the snake freak. Naruto nodded his head and smiled to her and then said, wouldn't it be better if it was 2 teams going instead of just 1? The third Hokage now sat in a chair in an emergency military council meeting of the Land of Fire. At the head of the council was none other than the Fire Daimyo himself, who had just read the report. Needless to say, he was not a happy man at all. So as I am to understand, this gentleman, one of the most notorious pirate lords as our enemy call him, and his fellow mariner lords, and you now tell me that he is in fact one Naruto Uzumaki who disappeared from your village at the age of 6 years and shortly after the death of his mother. The third Hokage then said, yes my lord, we only became aware of this a short time ago thanks to a mission to Wave Country and its village. The Fire Daimyo nodded his head and then turned to his admiralty. I have asked several times for you all to issue safe harbor licenses for them to use without the Land of Water finding out about this. And now we find that one of them was in fact born in our lands and hold the rights to an entire country and is quite possibly the only one that can even find it. And you told me that they were quite possibly an enemy? The Admiralty remained quiet as some of them had argued that same point but had been shot down by the older members and some of the younger members who had been intimidated by the Mariner Lords and what they were capable of. The Fire Daimyo then turned to his senior analyst and asked, what is the information that we have on the Black Fox? One of the admirals who had tried to support the Mariner Lords and their fight against tyranny decided to give his report and opened a large file containing the information. All of our files and information that we have on the Black Fox or Naruto Uzumaki is very limited at best. We can't even give you a proper rundown on his ship other than the fact that it is perhaps a frigate with at least 40 long-range cannons aboard and that it is, for the lack of a better word, pitch black from the hold to the canvas sails. The Fire Daimyo then asked, what of his personal combat capabilities? The same admiral then continued with another report. Like all pirates, he does use firearms, but they are very loud and not effective in our hidden village's area of expertise. But from what we do know, he has an impressive array of other skills including ninjutsu and is a known sword master. A civilian who had traveled with the third Hokage to this summit then spoke. I can vouch for that as I saw him in action myself. It was about 2 years ago and my ship the Lunar was en route to the Crescent Moon Kingdom to deliver a shipment of Fire Country sake. Everyone was listening to his statement with intensity as he then continued. As is common among our merchant guilds, we made sure to stay as far away from the border of Water Country due to the civil war at the time. However, we were intercepted by a Water Nation naval vessel that claimed we were in their territorial waters and for us to surrender or die. We decided to make a run for it knowing that we were still within international waters at the time and were fired upon us, which killed 7 members of the crew with the first volley they fired at us. Everyone was now surprised that this event had occurred and had not reached this council in the first place. They then prepared to board us by force, but before they could even set foot on our deck we heard the sound of cannon fire. Their primary deck was ripped apart by the cannon shot. We then saw this black ship come right out of the fog and ram them head on. I then saw all of these men and women who then come aboard the enemy ship's main deck and started to fight all of the Water Nation troops aboard. I saw the 3 senior officers of this ship cutting them down like they were nothing at all in the world. The one I later found out who was the Black Fox wasted no time making his way up to their command deck. One of the admirals, who had a unique set of scars upon his face, then spoke. Can you describe his personal fighting style? The civilian then spoke with a bit of nostalgia in his voice. Well, the first time I saw him was when he came out of the ball throwing away to his sides 2 personal and hands that had blown the heads off of 2 water soldiers, and then unsheathed his sword, which was like nothing I have ever seen before, and I have seen the 7 swordsman blades before. It was as black as night itself, with gold inlay that had boxes on and a whirlpool-like design in the blade itself, which seemed to have real seawater in the design that glowed blue. The entire room was now listening and recording everything he said. He was faster than anyone I have ever seen and cut them down like they were nothing to him. Then in one moment he dove behind one of his opponents and brought his sword back, cutting the man in 2 at the waist, and began to dodge projectiles while slicing and dicing his way to the bridge of the ship. We then watched him literally do something with his blade that made it split into 2 and then cut down the remainders of the officers who attempted to move the ship away from his vessel. He then ran his hand through his hair and continued his story. The Black Fox then separated us from the water country ship and told us to head to our destination, and that they would stay in the area. Hunting anymore violated the rules of the international waters. He had even had his crew repaired the damage to our vessel. As they then returned to their ship and moved back into the fog, we then heard some kind of sound coming from the damaged water bus and saw that the Black Fox had left the captain alive, only to watch the ship and its treacherous crew literally be pulled down into the water by some unknown means. One of the admirals was surprised by this statement. What do you mean it was pulled down? I'm saying that it looked like it had been grabbed by something and broken in 2 in the center of the ship and then pulled down to the watery depths, or to Davy Jones's lock. The civilian said as everyone was trying to process this new information. The fire daimyo was surprised by everything that he had heard and decided to make his decision and ruling on the subject. Based upon what information I have and what has been gathered for me, I hereby decree that we are to leave the Black Fox alone and attempt to at least convince him to return to his home, which is us. I will also try to gain information from the land of water through diplomatic means if possible, but we must approach everything with him cautiously, as I will not be responsible for an international incident involving him, and neither will any of you, including you, Admiral Scarlet. Admiral Scarlet was the man with 3 claw marks or scars upon his face, who had some personal history with the Uzumaki clan. Just nodded his head to the daimyo, but was absolutely furious with his leader and clutched his little red cross, even drawing blood in the process from his hatred of them. The 5 Mariner Lords' ships were busy pulling in every single piece of equipment and cargo they could carry as they prepared to head out to the Land of Fire for their mission. Naruto walked to one of the 3 men of wars with his 2 first mates at his side. Once I'm done with the water daimyo in May, I will be popping back on board the ship once we are en route. Get all the cargo you can stored below decks and have the crew stay at battle stations until we make it to the Land of Fire. The 2 of them quickly nodded and boarded the ship, barking out orders as Naruto could only smile at their antics, and boarded the man of war that was named Redemption. One of the crew members saw him and escorted him below decks to the war room that had been set up, and entered only to see the other lords standing before a large table at the center of the room, with both the daimyo and Mei were waiting for him. To the surprise of everyone, he also bought a small container which housed several sea charts of the Land of Fire's coastline. Naruto and Tayuya then walked up to the war table and looked Mei right in the eyes as she then spoke. Now, as you are all aware, almost every one of the major villages except for ours and the Land of Wind's hidden village has a stadium that is used for the Chunin exams once a year. What I dealt the village realizes is that this is the perfect opportunity for Orochimaru to not only gain entry to the village but also launch a surprise attack upon the village itself. Naruto and his sister were surprised but also impressed by the ingenuity of the snake's plan. The Chunin exams are a perfect opportunity for him to attack, but it's something that none of the normal villages would even remotely consider doing because of the financial risk that is at play here. The other Mariner Lords were curious about his statement, as he then said to them, "The exams in their own right are a replacement for war. Sometimes they work, but they are also an opportunity for all of the villages participating to gain future clients and to promote their genin to the next rank. So for any of them to even consider a sneak attack on another village's exams would be seen as potential suicide, as you might lose both respect and trust as well as potential clients by doing so." Jack nodded and then said, "And we all know that while the snake now has a village of his own, he still operates outside of normal laws and will not hesitate to cripple his old village even at the destruction of his own if need be." Tayuya nodded her head and then said, You're right, except he's not stupid and will try to keep the village going no matter what. But he's also a realist too, and if he doesn't do something to the Land of Fire to hurt them as well, they will just rebuild the Hidden Leaf and all of his scheming will be for nothing, so he has to deal with the Grande Fire Fleet as well. The Water Daimyo then spoke. We have also obtained information that the Land of Rice, where his ninja village is located, has been absorbing some of our renegade navy that we are still hunting at this time, which makes any attack upon the Land of Fire with any of us present an act of war with them as well. Lady Rouge could not help but smile. So when the time comes to attack, we strike them at their heart. That's why you wanted all of us to come? The daimyo nodded her head and then spoke. That is correct, my Lady Rouge. The Water Council would only allow me to spare 3 of our brand new dreadnoughts for this operation and are keeping the rest close to home just in case any of the rogues decided to start a surprise attack upon us. That is where you all come in, as you are extremely experienced sailors and warriors as well as warships are heavily armed for these kinds of engagements. Naruto then unsealed the charts and presented them on the table for all to see, including the Water Fleet Admiral, who was an old friend, and said, when we arrive at the Land of Fire, we should anchor here near this military base, which is the only logical choice for the Snake to attack, because without this main base it would be a very long time for the Fire Navy to recover, if any at all. We can also set up anchor in this part of the bay, which will give us plenty of room to maneuver and keep us far away from the Fire Navy so that they do not see us as a threat. Minerva was curious about his statements. Why this military base? He pointed at the charts and said, this is their primary military base, and it also has their dry docks and shipyards as well as supply lines for both the fleet and their hidden village. The young man nodded his head and asked, I'll need a copy of these charts so that we may enter the harbor according. Naruto nodded his head to him and continued his questions. I know from personal experience that the Konoha exams will take upwards of 6 weeks to complete, with a month-long preparation for the final exam. But to complete we need 3 members on each team and a sensei, so who is going to be our senseis? To answer his question, the door opened to reveal 2 members of the 7 swordsmen that made the Black Fox smile. Oh yeah, I'm taking fish face. Sasuke Uchiha had been walking all over the village, from one weapons shop to another, trying to find the strange weapons he had seen the Black Fox use that day on the bridge. So far he had had no luck, as every one of them were surprised by the request and were even more surprised when they learned this was a weapon that was used by Uzumaki. There was only one weapon shop that he knew might specialize in exotic weapons, as all the shop owners had called it. As he walked up to the shop called the 10 Blades and realized that this might be his only hope of finding this strange weapon that could help him in his quest for revenge. He then entered the shop and looked around the shop and its impressive merchandise, only to see Tenten standing behind the counter a little bit, always working on a set of daggers that were currently being claimed in maintenance. He then walked up to the counter and made some noise to get her attention. Tenten turned around and saw the Uchiha heir standing at her family's counter, waiting patiently for her to serve him. May I help you with something, Sasuke? He nodded his head and then spoke. You might be the only shop that can help me find what I'm looking for. Many of the other shops all told me that the weapon I'm looking for either doesn't exist or is very exotic, and that they are not given for producing it. Many of them recommended your weapon store. This caught her attention as she stopped the maintenance work she was currently doing and walked into the back of the shop and yelled out for her father. Dad, I got a special commission up here. As she returned to the front counter, Sasuke then heard heavy footsteps approaching from the back room, only to see a 6'2" man with an eye patch on his left eye with a heavy scar over said eye and a slight limp to his walk. The man took one look at Sasuke and then spoke in a somewhat deep voice. All right, young man, what's this special order you be wanting? Sasuke then began to explain what he had seen to the shop owner, doing everything he could to remember every detail about the strange blades and even some of the Black Fox's movements, hoping that they would help in identifying the weapon and that he could hopefully make one. The shop owner, however, was taken aback by the young Uchiha's request and description and put his finger up, signaling just a moment, and walked back to a book with a strange symbol that looked like the letter A upon it and opened it to a particular page and put it in front of his potential client and then spoke with confidence. Is this what you seek? Sasuke's eyes widened as he then said, that's the weapon that he was using, can you make it? The shop owner then noticed even his daughter seemed to be drooling over the prospect of this strange weapon and then decided to give both of them the bad news. I'm afraid that this particular weapon may be just a little too exotic even for my shop, as while I am aware of their existence, I do not know any of their internal workings to recreate one of them. The two of them were surprised by his statement as he then continued. Believe me, if I could make one I would have long ago, but this is an assassin weapon. This weapon is where the term "a blade in the crowd" came from. It is extremely effective in quick assassinations, but in the right hands it can be an aggressive hand-to-hand combat weapon as well. May I inquire how you came about the description of this weapon? This surprised both of them as Sasuke then began his explanation. It happened on the mission to Wave Country and I saw it being used by the notorious pirate the Black Fox. Tenten's father then closed the book and pointing to the symbol upon it and asked, "Did he have this symbol anywhere on his body?" Sasuke nodded his head, so some of them still exist. The two of them were surprised by his statement as he then explained, the weapons are called hidden blades and are one of the most formidable weapons that are used by the Assassin Brotherhood, but they were thought to be extinct thanks to the last great shinobi war. These weapons were very rare anyways and only issued to assassins. This pirate or privateer, as I think he really is probably the one of the last in existence and probably extreme well trained and probably the only one who would know if there are any more of them in existence or if the plans to create them have survived. So I have to go find a pirate to get me one of these weapons? I'm afraid so. There are however knockoffs, but they are nowhere near the standards of these weapons, and that is one of the reasons why no one wants them at all. I don't even carry them for that very reason. The shop owner said as he held the book close. Sasuke then asked the shop owner another question. Could you create a pair of them for me if I got you the plans? It's possible, but I need to see them to know for certain. Like I said, these are very complicated weapons and I need to know what I'm doing, so yes, if you can get the plans and pay for it, I'll make a set," he said. Sasuke could only smile as he now had a new objective. Scarlet had grabbed a bottle of his favorite drink and walked into his private booth only to be shocked to see one of his comrades already sitting there in the darkness with his singular red Sharingan lightly glowing in the darkness. Scarlet then sat down and put the bottle in front of him as he then said to his fellow comrade in arms, "What are you doing here? Is that any way to greet an old friend, Scar?" The stranger said. Scarlet growled a bit and then said in a harsh tone, "Don't you dare call that. You should have killed her when you had the chance and not used her to set that damn fox free upon that village. You set every single one of our plans back years by doing that." The stranger gave a slight laugh. "Oh, like going to kill his mother and then losing one of our biggest prizes, which we now find out is one of our biggest problems to date, and it's all thanks to you, Scar." Scarlet then took a big drink of his liquor and then said, "Oh, I would like to take credit for that, but I honestly can't. All I do know is that it is someone among us who did that deed. I was in that village that day on other business just like you." The red glowing eye narrowed somewhat. "So you are telling the truth. I'd be lying if I said I didn't believe you." Scarlet then took another drink and touched his face, remembering the past, and decided to attend to present matters. "So why are you here?" "To give you a much needed warning, and I was thinking of not to, but now what the hell. Our former friend the Snake will be attacking the village and Fire Harbor during the finals of the exams," the stranger said. Scarlet could only smile as he then said, "So I'm supposed to be on a training mission with my personal fleet during this time?" "Yes, this will give him the ammunition he needs to take more power without our enemies even knowing, and weakening the Leaf Village in the process as well as the Land of Wind in the process. Let's have a few more drinks and then discuss things of the future." The stranger smiled at his comrade in arms and then said, "Oh yes, let's. May the Father of Understanding guide us." Scarlet cheered his comrade and then said, "May the Father of Understanding guide us." The two of them then devoured their drinks and set them on the table next to a set of blood-red crosses and a small document bearing the words East India Trading Company. Naruto walked along the deck of his ship observing his crew going about their duties as they sailed to the Land of Fire. He then however heard groaning coming from his newest crew member. "Oh, suck it up, fish face." The man in question was as blue as the sea itself, with what looked like gills on his cheeks and shark-like teeth. He then looked up at him in an almost pleading manner. "How much longer do I have to do this?" Naruto then made a face and turned to look at some of his crew and asked aloud, "Gentlemen and ladies, how much longer does he have to do this?" The men and women who were busy repairing a section of the ship's railing looked at the blue-skinned man with contentment and then said, "We will be done in a couple of hours, sir." Naruto then turned back to his newest crew member and sensei and then said with a smile, "Well, it looks like you'll be done once we reach the Land of Fire by this evening, Kisame." Kisame felt like groaning as he then said, "You do know it was an accident, right? Tell that to my crew that has to fix the damage you did, fish face. And besides, I warned you to watch where you point that sword of yours, and as we all know, you didn't listen to me," he said. The blue swordsman as he walked away could only be heard complying that it was an accident and that he had no intention of doing it again. Once Naruto reached the command deck over his quarters, he noticed his cousin fighting back the laughter at the scene before her as one of the most feared swordsmen doing deck-hand work aboard the Black Vixen. "Karen, if you're going to laugh, just get it over with already, he's embarrassed enough as it is." As soon as she heard this, she just couldn't hold it in anymore and laughed. After about a minute she stopped herself and then looked over to the Black Vixen's sister ship the Faulkner and wondered about the other 7 swordsman member they had aboard. "How do you think Zabuza is doing over their cousin?" Naruto looked over at his vessel's sister's ship and then pulled out his spyglass and looked over and just smiled as he then said, "A lot better than ours." Tayuya, Isaribi and Haku were fighting together as a team against their new sensei Zabuza Momochi, who was now a newly reinstated member of the 7 Swordsmen of the Mist. The crew of the Faulkner watched the practice battle with astonishment. Zabuza then motioned for them to stop as he caught his breath and was actually quite impressed since this team would require the most work. He then watched as the team took a much-needed break as they observed him looking out upon the small fleet. Tayuya then locked up alongside him and said, "You look deep in thought, Zabuza?" He nodded his head to her and then said, "I am. I was so concerned that this plan will not work at all, but I'm happy to see that I was wrong about that." "That's good to hear, sensei. Can I ask you another question?" She then saw him nod his head. "Do you know how to sail a ship? One of the requirements for being a good mist shinobi, especially one of the 7 swordsmen, is that you both know how to swim very well and how to sail a ship. Needless to say, I got very good at swimming at that part and of course being a swordsman." He stopped for a moment as if reflecting on his past. "But I unfortunately never got the some level of experience to be a good sailor, I am afraid. I know what I'm doing, I just don't have the necessary experience. I would like to be proficient at it," he said with a sense of both pride and disappointment at the last part. She then nodded to him and had to ask a question. "Do you think we have a shot at passing the exam?" "I do. Just don't let your desire for revenge against both the snake and whoever was responsive for your mother's death cloud your judgment, my student," he said to her. "Believe me, I know how you feel since I had to watch so many of my friends with bloodlines are murdered by the 4th Miss Cage. Even though I have planned for months, I was still unable to kill and had to flee, but what really makes me angry was find out later that she was nothing more than a puppet for someone to use just because what he held," Zabuza said with a bit of anguish in his voice. Tayuya could only nod her head as she remembered what her tenant had told her and then said to him, "Well, if their original plan was to try to take the 3-tailed turtle, they failed." "What do you mean?" "When Mamie and my brother fought him, we were able to defeat him and unfortunately led to his death. However, we resealed old 3 inside of me so they won't be to get a hold of him 2.5 years from now," she said to him. Even behind the bandages he just smiled as he knew that there was no way for the stranger with the red eye to control an Uzumaki. Their only option would be to forcibly remove it from her and her brother, which would be a very difficult operation in the future, and he did not pity them one bit. The Grand Fire Nation Navy Fleet Yard and base known as Phoenix Nest was as calm as could be. They had already welcomed several foreign ships that were here for the Chunin exams into their harbors with absolutely no problems whatsoever. One of the tenants looked out only to see 8 ships off in the distance and pulled out his spyglass and took a look only to run to his commanding officer with a look of both shocked and potential fear upon his face at what he had just seen. The young officer then ran into the officers' lounge and quickly shouted out for all to hear, "You, sir, a group of water country warships have just entered the outer areas of the harbor." The young officer watched the room become a site of action as the senior officers made a mad dash to the upper observance areas of the fort and quickly pulled out their spyglasses only to be surprised to see 3 heavy warships and 5 frigates that looked like they could do some serious damage. One of the officers, who was known as a master of arms, "We begin to observe the ships and their armament as well as their country of origin," and then spoke to his commanding officers. "Sir, I have never seen ships like these before. They have got to be packing at least over 60 guns on just one broadside alone." "Are you saying that they are even more well armed than them, our men of wars?" the commander asked. "These ships look like they have seen battles, sir, and yes, I do believe they are more armed than us. However, it is the 5 smaller ships that are of the frigate class I'm concerned with more." "What do you mean?" the commander asked with curiosity in his voice. "I believe they are the pirate lord vessels, sir, and I managed to see his name on one of them, sir." "It's his ship, sir, it's the Black Vixen," the master of arms said, seeing the look of shock on everyone's face. One of the other officers had his spyglass trained on the ships and then noticed that they were signaling the fort. "Sir, they are signaling us." The commanding officer quickly pulled out his spyglass and pointed towards the water country ships and was surprised by what he was seeing. I think they're here for the Chunin exams. The master-at-arms read the message and said aloud for all to hear, Phoenix Nest, we are the protection and diplomatic party representing the water daimyo of water country here to reopen trade negotiations with your land as well as for our shinobi to compete in the current Chunin exams and request permission to negotiate. May we come ashore? The senior officer then turned to one of his men said, do we have an ambassador here? Yes sir, he is currently in the town. Informed him to immediately come to the board as there will be diplomatic matters to be discussed and grant them permission to come ashore with full military honors as well. He said as his officers immediately signaled back to the water ships and went to work preparing everything for their arrival. May Jack and the water daimyo herself all exited the long boat entering the Phoenix Nest fort for the negotiations to take place. Alongside them were a group of highly trained water marines as well as the two ambassadors who looked as rough and tough as well as they were presentable. They then entered a small well-lit room with many Fire Nation sailors presenting their swords in a show of respect. The small group then approached a table and sat down with both May and Jack taking up positions directly behind them in case of any trouble. The ambassador for the Land of Fire had already been briefed on certain factors including the matter regarding the Black Fox and decided to take things very carefully. First of all, I would like to thank you for coming to our country and to compete in the exams. But I must ask out of curiosity, why do you choose to? And now when you could have waited for another exam to occur later on? The two water ambassadors and the water daimyo herself were actually quite experienced in the realm of negotiations and were not surprised by this question. That is actually quite simple. Really, your stadium as well as this time of year are perfect to host the exams and is considered one of the best times for any nation or village to compete in the exams, and despite just coming out of a war we are still quite experienced in the shinobi areas, if you get my meaning. So you have a team entering the exams? The fire ambassador asked. She just smiled at him and then said, no, we have 2 teams entering the exams. It would have been 3 but there since he felt they were not yet ready and wait for the next exams later this year, but we needed these 2 teams would not want to wait as they are quite experienced and should have received a field promotion, but this was much more efficient and would promote more interaction with foreign ninja. The fire ambassador was surprised by the statement but continued on, knowing that this might actually help their own country as well. Very well, I see no reason they can't not eat. However, what do you mean by opening trade negotiations? I mean just that, as you know, the Land of Water is made up of many different islands, both he and snow, and our economy has recently begun to boom and we are in need of customers sell our wares to. We would also like to open trade with other nations for some of their exotic materials and things, and knowing how many people come through your land, we are hoping that you would allow us to set up a trading post here. In fact, I have already sent someone had to buy the very large plot of land to act as our trading and export embassy for our many businesses and jobs until they can purchase land and ports as well. The water daimyo said to them with a clear intention that they had already put a lot of thought into it and had quite a bit of fun with their reactions. Well, if you wish to build your embassy on those lands that you have already purchased, there is nothing we can do to stop you, but would also like to know if we can help in any way? The fire ambassador said, hoping to get an opening he could use later. The 2 water ambassadors and their daimyo looked at each other and then turned back to the fire messenger as one of the water ambassadors then said, not at this time, sir. We have brought plenty of supplies to begin building both the embassy and the ports necessary for our livelihood, but we thank you for the offer. The fire ambassador was little taken aback by this but went on to the next subject, that he knew what needed to be discussed. Very well, I can understand that. However, is one area of expertise I would like to discuss with you about a particular individual. I know that you are referring to Captain Naruto Uzumaki. What matters do you wish to discuss with him? We wish to try to convince him to return home here in the Land of Fire. The fire ambassador said. Jack whirled his eyes and then spoke under his breath, catching the fire ambassador's attention, who then asked him, I was unaware that this matter would be any of your concern, sir. My name is Captain Jack Webb, sir, pirate lord of the water seas and a good friend to Captain Uzumaki. The fire ambassador then turned to the water daimyo and asked her, I was unaware that a pirate lord like yourself would even be in her services, sir? The water daimyo then gave the fire ambassador a rather cold look. I would be very careful about your next words if I were you, ambassador. Captain Webb has recently been reinstated as a water country officer in our meeting and will silk team to hold his position as a mariner lord, or as you call them, pirate lords. The fire officers as well as the ambassador felt the coldness and hate in her voice and realized that the pirate lords were a touchy subject with them. The investor quickly changed the subject back to Uzumaki. "And we will remember that, my lady. However, we must have an opportunity to speak with Lord Uzumaki? It is not my decision if he will talk with you but his own, and just to let you know, he is also a mariner lord as well and has diplomatic immunity thanks to his years of service to the rebellion and the new water country government." She said to him, catching his reaction that things have not gone as planned for them and that these talks would go on for a little bit. It had been almost an hour when the water daimyo and her escort party returned to the water nation ships to deliver the news about the negotiations. Naruto to Yuya and they senseis watched as she walked up to them with a clear bit of news. "Well, you two, I have some good news?" The two of them looked at her with curiosity as Naruto then asked, "And what would that news be?" "Well, first off, the Chunin exams will begin tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. at the village's Shinobi Academy. Now here are your headbands and the papers to participate in the exams. Please sign them and have your teammates sign theirs as well and then present them when you enter the exam at the front of the academy," the water daimyo said as she then handed them their papers and then decided to explain more about her negotiation. The water daimyo then sat on one of the railings of the ship and then said to the two Uzumakis, "The two embassies have been agreed to, so we will need to unpack all the cargo from the ships to begin construction on the harbor embassy first. However, allow me to inform you two of the wishes of the fire government." Naruto could only imagine what this was about and just had to ask, "What do they want?" "They want you to return to the Leaf Village. However, they are unaware of you," to Yuya. Naruto looked at his sister and then gave a devilish smile and then said, "It will be nearly impossible to keep this quiet once we enter the exam. We will deal with them when the time comes, but I would recommend getting the Shinobi ambassador and the embassy constructed as soon as possible to prepare for the fallout." Yuya nodded to her brother and then said her mind as well. "I agree, we'll do with it when it comes, but for the moment we should get back to our ships and get everything ready for tomorrow. It would be a 40 minutes journey to the village if we walk by foot, so I recommend we go before sunrise," Naruto said to everyone as they nodded their heads and went about their business to prepare for the next day. The sea air was cool and comfortable. The morning of the Chunin exams were to start. With still 2 hours before sunrise, the crews of the Water Nation ships were still busy offloading the cargo for the construction of the embassy. Inside his cabin, Naruto was busy finishing his outfitting for the exam this morning but couldn't help but what was going to happen to this day as he heard a knock at his cabin door. After opening the cabin door, he saw his cousin Karen and first mate Suigetsu walked into the cabin and instantly saw him putting the finishing touches on his outfit and equipment as he then turned to them and said, "I hope you two are prepared for this." Karen nodded her head and said, "Yeah, I'm outfitted for an entire week. Why, may I ask you how to do this?" "Because if they have not changed too much of the exam, then second part will take place in the Forest of Death and should take up to about 5 days to complete," he said to them. Suigetsu couldn't help but feel excited about showing off his skills against other shinobi. He then noticed his captain walking forward and motioned for them to follow him out of the cabin and onto the main desk and said, "She will be here when you get back, Naruto." He gave a nod to them as he lightly touched the rail and then put his hood back up and walked over to their sensei, who, happy to no longer be doing manual labor aboard the Black Vixen. Kisame then positioned himself to walk down the side of the ship into the longboat with his students following right behind him. Despite what many might have thought about him, Kisame had in fact trained all three of them at one time or another without his former organization knowing about it, as well as giving the rebellion pieces of information to use against the rogue water government. However, he would not willingly tell anybody that he was quite in fact scared of the Black Fox after accidentally seeing the man's cousin and sister in the bathhouse that one time. The human shark, as some have called him, still had nightmares about that day. He turned to look at the three of them as the longboat moved quietly through the early morning with another longboat with 4 people in it as well heading towards the beach to begin their journey to the Hidden Leaf. The two Chunin had arrived early for their shift at the guard gate and couldn't help but feel that today would be one of those days, and any thought about how boring this day would be for them being friends saw 8 people walking up to the gate and presented papers for the Chunin exams. Now, while this was not unusual in itself, the fact that the two senses were members of the 7 Swordsmen of the Mist were. The fact that they saw both Zabuza and Kisame walking right into their village on their way to the academy was more than enough to surprise them to no end. "Did you just see that?" His friend could only nod in disbelief as he watched the Mist group walk deeper into the village. Even the Anbu who were in hiding could not help but stare in disbelief at who had just entered the village and looked at one another wondering what was about to happen and how bloody would this year's exam really be. The first destination for the two teams was the Silver Leaf Hotel, where all the foreign dignitaries and competitors in the exam would be staying for the duration of the Chunin exams. After securing their rooms, they then made their way to the Shinobi Academy and ran up the tree that gave them an excellent view of the teams that will be entering the exams. Naruto and his team as well as his sisters watched as many groups entered. However, it was when the Sand team entered that he felt something was wrong, and especially as he looked at an old friend and quickly activated his eagle vision to look at the back of her neck and let out a small curse that his sister installing knew something was wrong. What is it? He turned to face her and said, "It's Gaara's sis. She has a personality seal on the back of her neck that is making her act like an homicidal maniac again. And I can tell from the crude work that it's the snake freaks." Tayuya let out a small curse as she did not want them discovered by their potential enemies. They had seen many potential problems come and go, but had also seen two teams that made up the Rookie Nine, as they were known, recognizing one of them from Wave Country. A little while later they then saw the Sound team enter the academy, and right behind them was none other than the Snake's own master spy Kabuto, and his team had to forcibly restrain several members of the team from going to kill him because of past encounters. "Not yet, you four. I know how much you want to kill him, but just went okay." The four of them just nodded, but really wanted to rip him apart for what he had done to them alongside Orochimaru. They then saw two more teams enter, including one with a strange green spandex wearing young man enter the building as with his team. At this moment in time their senseis decided to enter the building and wait for them, as it was getting close to the time for the exam to begin. The three crew members of the Black Vixen then noticed the other team they had seen in the Wave mission now entered the building and decided that it might be a good time to enter as well. For Whom the Bell Tolls by Metallic starts playing in the background as they entered the building. Rock Lee and his teammates Tenten and Neji were getting ready to enter the exam room, only to stop dead in their tracks seeing the Mist teams walking by and coming to the realization of just they were. Tenten could not believe who she was seeing again after all these years. "Guys, that's him." Neji looked at her and asked, "Who are you talking about?" "That guy who just walked by is Naruto Uzumaki, also known as the Pirate Lord the Black Fox," she said to them, only to see them both looked at him with a mixture of fear and excitement, facing someone of his caliber. Guy's team watched them walk up to the exam room and watched as the fox in one quick motion brought his foot up and slammed it into the door, sending the door flying into the room. Sasuke had just asked Kabuto for information on both Rock Lee and Gaara of the desert when the door to the classroom suddenly flew inwards, nearly hitting several of the Chunin hopefuls. Everyone was exceedingly angry at who had just done that, only to go pale white seeing who was standing in the doorway slowly walking in like he owns the place. The song stops at this moment. As soon as Sasuke and Kabuto to get up the look over, only to see one of the most notorious people in the entire elemental nation standing before them. Sasuke quickly turned back to Kabuto and demanded to know everything about the Black Fox. "All right, let me see if I've got something here then. Oh, here it is." Kabuto turned around to look at the wall where the door had stopped, only to see that it had been embedded in the wall from the force of the kick alone, and became very concerned as just about everyone in the room was now looking at the ninja information card. Name: Naruto Uzumaki. Status: Clan Heir. Known alias: the Black Fox, Pirate Lord. Known jutsus: unknown at this time. Known swordsman skills: is known to have been trained by the 7 swordsmen of the mist. A to S-rank shinobi. SS rank sailor and mariner lord. Is known to have fought the 4th Mizkage alongside Mei Terumi, and is a Water Country War veteran. Everyone in the room was shocked to see this kind of information on someone who was competing in the exam. Sasuke was once both shocked and happy to see them, since it meant that he could quite possibly gain not only this man's fighting style but also his weapons as well. But before he could even demand anything of the Black Fox, they were interrupted by the appearance of the exam proctor. Kakashi was currently standing in the teacher's lounge waiting for news on his students, only to see the face of 2 of the 7 swordsmen of the mist standing in the room drinking coffee as if nothing was wrong and talking. "So do you think they're both going to succeed?" Kisame took a drink and then said, "Yep, I mean, we trained for crying out loud, Zabuza." "Good point." Kisame then smiled and said, "I wonder how long it's going to take for them to figure out. He's in the exam? Let's just wait and see." All of the Leaf Ninjas were curious about what they had been talking about and had totally forgotten about the time when a young Chunin came into the room to inform them that the next part of the exam was about to begin, but also decided to make an announcement. "Oh, just to let everyone know, the Black Fox is representing the Hidden Mist." Every single one of the other exigencies in the room just looked at the two swordsmen as they just made a posting motion with their coffee mugs and big smiled upon their faces. Naruto and Tayuya had already given their teams code names. His team was known simply as Black and her team was known as Red. Sasuke saw an opportunity to try to obtain the hidden blades from the pirates only to receive a strong kick to his reproductive organs courtesy of Tayuya, who then revealed her own hidden blades and have them at his throat as Naruto walked up to him and said in his more dangerous voice, which was the same one he used the day he killed Gato, "You should think twice about walking up on us. Men have been killed for less." Tayuya then removed her hidden blade from his throat, allowing him to get up. However, he decided to still be his arrogant self and demand things from people he should know better than doing that to. "You will give me those hidden blades." Naruto let out a small laugh as he then said, "Is that so?" "Yes. And how would you know about these weapons if I might ask?" Sasuke then pointed at Tenten and said, "Because her father said he would make me a pair of them if I got him the designs, but I think I want your more." Naruto just laughed at him and said, "Sorry, but that's not happening on either front, and I'm going to have a little talk with her father later." Tenten walked up to him surprised and said, "Do you remember me, Naruto?" His personality and voice changed as he looked her in the eyes and said, "It's been a long time, old friend, but I am going to have to talk to your father about certain things." She gave him the nod and was happy to see that he still considered her a friend. He then noticed the pink-haired teammate of the Uchiha looked rather angry at him. However, she could do nothing as their proctor arrived to start the next part of the exam in the Forest of Death. Anko looked out upon the sea of potential Chunins and let out a giggle as she walked up to them intent upon seeing what they were truly capable of. However, before she could even begin, Anbu appeared right beside her and whispered something into her ear. Naruto and Tayuya's mist teams known as Black and Red looked upon this scene, realizing that it was about them, and let out a small bit of laughter as they waited for the next part of the exam to begin. They then saw that Anko had walked back to the group with what looked like papers in her hands and then said, "All right kiddies, now before we can begin this next fun part of the exam in what I like to call my playground, but to others it is known simply as Training Ground 44 or the Forest of Death." She observed the assembled group talking amongst themselves as she continued to explain, "Now for all of you to continue you'll have to sign these waivers that states that if you, I don't know, let's say die. The hidden leaf is not responsible in any way, shape or form, so if you wish to continue please sign right here." All of the Chunins who were assisting her began to hand out the waivers to all of the teams as their proctor then began to explain this next part of the exam. "Now here are the rules kiddies. This exam is a survival test that will take up to 5 days of your life in my little playground." Ino was truly surprised to learn this, but then heard her larger teammate say, 5 days. What are we supposed to do about food?" Shikamaru could only shake his head at Choji's antics and simply muttered, "Troublesome." Anko could only laugh at the antics of one of her friend's son and then said, "Well, it is a survival exercise, remember, and it's a forest too. So when you think about it, food is everywhere, but at the same time you all might be food to the creatures living in here as well." One group of hopeful Chunin just had to ask, "What kind of animals?" She gave them a psychotic smile. "All things like giant killer insects, poisonous plants that are also carnivorous, and of course my personal favorite, the big bad tigers that love to use our bones like a toothpick." Once again the talking began, quickly discussing this added bit of information. However, before they could continue she decided to add a bit more to their thoughts. "But that's not all kiddies, each of you will also be given one of these 2 scrolls here." Everyone looked at the scrolls and then her as she continued to explain, "You'll need both a heaven and earth scroll to proceed to the next part of the exam, so you'll have to take one from one of the other teams. Oh, and by the way, don't open them." One of the hopefuls then asked, "What happens if we open them?" Anko just gave him a sweet smile and said, "Why spoil the surprise? Now to pass, as I said, you need both scrolls and all of your teammates still alive, and then get to the tower at the center of the training ground within the 5 days time limit that have been allotted to you, and you move on, otherwise you fail." Everyone looked at her with shock and a bit of concern as they realized that only half of them would make it to the next part of the exam. She then said, "Now my fellow shinobi here will escort each of you to an individual gate where you can begin this next part of the exam. I'll just one more piece of advice for you all. Try not to die." Many of the high-ranking officers in the Fire Navy now stood upon the observation deck of the Phoenix Nest Naval Station and observed the small water nation fleet that had taken anchor just a little ways away in their harbor. One of the captains was studying each ship both in its design and armament. The lead admiral then turned to the captain and asked him about the water fleet. Have you been able to identify them? To be honest, sir, I have never seen any of these ships before, however, it's the 5 in the middle that worries me the most, sir. The captain said. The admiral was quite curious about the statements and then asks, what do you mean? The captain continued his assessment. From what I can tell, sir, the 3 big ones are clearly man-of-wars that make even ours look weak in comparison. Even their names are appropriate for them. Another captain with a spyglass then began to name the ships. The first ship's name is Great White. The second one is named White Tip and the third is named Thresher. They're all named after sharks. It fits the tradition of the water navy, but what about the other 5? The admiral asked. One of the officers looked directly into a much more powerful telescope to get a good look at them. He then pointed the telescope at a black ship with black sails. As soon as he looked through it, his eyes widened both in shock and the realization of the political nightmare that had just come down upon his head, the Black Vixen. So I take the rest are? Yes, sir, they are. Another officer said. What is your assessment? The admiral asked them. The captain took another look and began to speak. Those 5 for all heavy frigates, sir. The Vixen is of a design I've never seen before in person. One of the captains was surprised by this statement. I thought you seen every vessel that floats? I've seen most of them, but there are exceptions. However, some of its characteristics remind me of whirlpool vessels before they're full. He then said to all of them. This caught everyone's attention as he then said, there is also another ship looks exactly like the Black Vixen. I think it's another ship of the same class of vessel. The admiral's curiosity was piqued as he then asked, how dangerous do you think they all are? The young captain looked at the area containing the ships and then said with a stern voice as he gave his opinion, they will not be a danger to us unless we provoke them first. However, those 3 ships from the land of rice might be a different story, not just to us but to them as well. The admiral was curious by this statement. Why would that be? Because, sir, they were the ones helping with the bloodline war. The admiral turned back and knew that something would have to be done in the future, as he himself did not trust the old water navy that had killed so many innocents in their time. Keep an eye on all of them. I want to know what they're up to at all times. Yes, sir. Naruto, Karen and Suigetsu had been escorted to their gate and were then handed their scroll for the exam by an ANBU. Suigetsu then took a look at the scroll as soon as the Anbu had left them and then said to his comrades, looks like they gave us an earth scroll. The 2 Uzumakis nodded their heads and turned back to look at the gate as Karen then inquired, so what's the first thing we do once we are in there? Naruto looked the forest over and then said, we look for the scroll we need and I have an idea on how to get it. The 2 of them just nodded, knowing that his ideas usually worked better than he had anticipated. Just then the gate flew open and the 3 of them rushed in as fast as they could, knowing that they had a destination in mind to execute their plan. Tayuya and her teammates looked at their scroll, realizing this little piece of paper could determine their fate and that they had to find its companion to pass this part of the exam. Haku examined the scroll and then said to her teammates, it's an earth scroll, this means we gotta find heaven one, right? No, you think, really? Tayuya said in a sarcastic tone. Inari could only roll her eyes at her friend's antics. Right at that moment the gate flew open and the 3 of them went right in, knowing that they had a lot of work ahead of them. The 3rd Hokage could just feel the headache coming on badly as the meeting went on about the return of one Naruto Uzumaki. The council was trying to come up with a plan to keep him in the village at all costs. However, let it be said that the civilians were never ones for thinking ahead and for the consequences that these kinds of decisions would bring, as the Shinobi Council had eventually had enough and put their 2 cents in. Are you out of your minds? He has diplomatic immunity from the Land of Water as one of their shinobi and is currently competing in the Chunin exams and cannot be touched by anyone here. One stupid council member then spoke his mind. We cannot let the heir of the 4th Hokage escape us again. He needs to be here in the village where we can protect. One of the shinobi let out a sneer at hearing this and then said in a cold tone, oh yeah, this village did a real good job protecting his mother from harm. And he will not believe a single word any of you say, or as for that matter. Why would you say that? The civilian asked. Another shinobi then spoke out, if you were trying to get him to marry your daughter so you can have access to his funds and so forth, I would forget about it right now if I were you. A rather feral-looking female shinobi then spoke for all to hear. Either way, we must talk with him. I suggest that we request a meeting with him as soon as the Forest of Death part of the exam is done. They all began to agree with her as they knew that things needed to be handled with care in this kind of situation. After just 20 minutes, Of being inside the forest of death, the three pirates had become quite curious and cautious as they walked through the thick foliage. Naruto turned to his cousin and asked, "Karen, how many teams are around us at this moment?" She stretched out her senses and felt the surrounding area and smiled. "Quite a few, cousin. They're not making any moves towards. I don't think they know we're here." He then gave a smile and began to sing out loud for all to hear. "Now we are ready to head for the horn." The two of them instantly knew what he was doing and began to sing the song Randy Dandy O. As well, way, I, rollin', go. Our boots and our clothes boys are all in the pond. Tim Rollickin' Randy Dandy O. Ino had been curious about the Black Fox ever since seeing him at the exam room and listened to Sakura's stories about what had happened on their mission to Wave Country quite intently and was hoping to see him and his teammates in action. As they walked through the area, they all began to hear three people singing and went towards the noise. Heave a paw, heave away. Shikamaru and Choji were now very curious and a bit afraid as they followed Ino through the brush and eventually used a thick bush as cover and watch. Way, I, rollin', go. The anchors on board and the cables all stored. Tim Rollickin' Randy Dandy O. Choji was trying to figure out why they were singing so loudly and what kind of song this was. Shikamaru saw the looks of confusion upon their faces and said for them to hear, "It's called a sea shanty. It's a song used by sailors to help keep the crew's spirits up and to help them when they work. And they're bringing people in to take their scroll. Soon we'll be warping her out through the locks. Way, I, rollin', go." Many more people were in hiding listening to the song and waiting for their chance to attack, not knowing that they would be signing their death warrants as the next part of the song began. Where the pretty young gals all come down in their flocks. Tim Rollickin' Randy Dandy O. Heave a paw, oh, heave away, way, I, rollin', go. Anko and her fellow shinobi could only listen to the song as one of her subordinates ran up to her with a concerned look on his face. "We have a big problem." The next part was sung by Naruto himself as he knew his teammates would pick up right afterwards. "Come the bars, bullies, and heave her away. Soon we'll be rollin' her way down the bay. Heave a paw, oh, heave away, way, I, rollin', go. The anchors on board and the cables all stored. Tim Rollickin' Randy Dandy O." As soon as they were done singing, a group of rain shinobi appeared in a tree overlooking them. Naruto gave it a wicked-looking smile and walked forward and then said for all to hear, "Looky here, boys. It's some lost birds that never learned to fly." The comet surprised them greatly that he would say such a thing, but what got their attention even more was that he pulled his sword out of its scabbard right at that moment and seemed to swing it in the air at them. At first they thought he was delusional or even insane until they felt the wind picking up around him and quickly moved, realizing he had shot a strong wind jutsu at them, completely destroying the tree that they had just been standing on. The look of shock upon their faces was not something they could hide at all, as they realized this was the same man who claimed to be the Black Fox. The other two members of his team also quickly removed their swords from their sides as well. However, before they could even make a move against Team Black, they heard noises of things crashing and breaking behind them and turned back just in time to see large sections of the trees coming down upon them. They were able to get out of the way just seconds before the large branches hit the ground where they had just been standing. The three rain ninjas were in absolute shock at the level of destruction that one swing of the black sword could do. They then looked at the other two teammates and their swords and were also a bit surprised, as they had never seen weapons like this before. The other male member of the team, who sported sharp shark-like teeth just like the seven swordsmen of the mist and had a strange shaped blade that looked like it had sections made of shark teeth that reflected the light off of them. The young red-headed girl sported a almost straight blade that had strange sections built into the blade, and within a second it had become a whip-like blade, making their fears go up even further. The three rain ninjas were now very concerned as Naruto walked forward and spoke to the leader of the group. "Tell me, little rain ninja, do you fear death?" The young man could not even speak to them as he was very afraid. Naruto then gave a dark smile and spoke once more. "So you do fear death? Alright then, just hand over the scroll and the shall let you go. After all, there are plenty of days remaining in this exam for you to acquire the scrolls you need." "So what will it be?" One of the other rain ninjas then spoke out. "Don't give him the scroll." Before any of the others could say a word, the strange whip-like sword wrapped around the young man who spoke out just a second ago. Karen held the blade tightly and then spoke in a deadly tone. "Remember, boy, we are S-rank level shinobi and pirates. And as you know, S-rank usually means, is the money really worth your life?" Naruto then held out his hand for the scroll. What will the decision be, boy? The lead ninja then handed over the scroll to Naruto and began to back off as Karen then released the other ranged shinobi who also began to run deep into the forest following his comrades. Team Black then looked at the scroll and smiled as it was exactly what they need. Now that was a bit easier than I thought it would be. Suigetsu could only smile at their luck. So what's the next move, Captain? We head to the tower as soon as possible. Keep an eye out for any more danger. With this said, the three of them began to walk deeper into the woods and eventually disappeared from sight. Ino, Shikamaru and Choji were at a loss for words at this moment as they watched the three pirate ninjas disappear into the woods. You guys saw that, right? They could only nod to her as Choji then spoke. That was so unreal. How are they even competing in this exam? Shikamaru had a theory and spoke out. From what information we heard before in the classroom, they are all highly dangerous shinobi, but because of the civil war in the land of water at the time they were unable to be promoted, so while they may actually be at a Jonin's level, they are actually still ranked as Genin. So instead of getting a field promotion they are here competing in the exam? Ino said in a questioning tone. Shikamaru nodded his head as they all realize how dangerous this particular exam was going to be. Team Red of the Hidden Mist Village led by Tayuya continued to walk through the forest, hearing from time to time the sounds of battle occurring in the distance. Just then her communicator came to life. Hey sis, how are you doing? She then spoke into the communicator as her teammates listen in as well. We are doing well brother, but haven't found another team yet. Keep your senses open as I suspect it won't be long until someone tries to come after you guys. We already have our scroll, so we're on our way to assist you. He said over the line. She just rolled her eyes and nodded her head as she responded. All right, we will meet up with you soon. Keep your eyes open until we meet up. Got it sis, be careful. We will be. As soon as she said this they began to walk through the area, keeping their eyes and ears open as they went. As soon as they entered the clearing they saw a group of earth ninjas standing there waiting for them with a very evil look upon their faces. The lead ninja then walked forward with a blade in his hand and a smug look upon his face, now seeing that it was the somewhat less dangerous group of mist shinobi. The three females could only let out a small laugh as they approached the group of young men who were too inexperienced for their own good. The lead shinobi then spoke. You know, if you girls don't want to die, just hand over your scroll to us. All three of them turned to each other and started laughing out loud for all to hear. Tayuya could barely contain herself as she then said, are you guys like comedians or something? Because if you think that is enough to make us give up this scroll, you got another thing coming. Like your death. The three of them became enraged enough that they fell right into the three girls' trap. Hiku quickly materialized several of her ice needles and tossed them right into the neck of one of them with something attached to them that looked like a sealed tag attached to the ends, which then began to sizzle and finally exploded. The other two were caught totally off guard by this as Isaribi then produced two swords made out of pure water that then cut through the middle section of her opponent. The final member of the Earth team was so shocked by their skills that he didn't even register at first the blade passing right through his heart by Tayuya. He looked down at his wound and watched as she pulled the sword from his chest and then spoke in a surprised tone, that's not funny one bit. They then watched as his body fell forward hard and then rolled over on his back, revealing his shocked face. The three of them began to immediately check the bodies for their scroll and came up on another Earth scroll. Hiku then asked, what do we do now? We take it with us, it might prove useful in the future. Tayuya said to them as she then began to walk deeper into the forest. The three of them walked through the forest for some time until they met up with Team Black, who walked up to them. Naruto then became curious and asked them, were you able to acquire any scrolls? Tayuya held up both of her Earth scroll and then said, we got one, but it's the same one we already had before, so out of curiosity what do we do now? Before Naruto could even say a word they heard sounds of battle off in the distance. He quickly realized this could open up an opportunity for his sister's team. Well, that sound could be opportunity knocking. Yeah, with a cannon, she said with sarcasm in her voice and followed her brother and his team towards the sounds of battle. Sasuke could still not believe that this strange grass ninja that they had encountered was in fact the renegade Sannin Orochimaru. The snake Sannin had proven to be more of a threat than they had anticipated, as he had easily taken the team apart piece by piece and was toying with them the whole time. His other two teammates were attempting to aid him in his fight against the Sannin but had proven to be only a minor nuisance to the man. He however quickly took on a smile, made several hand signs and shot out of his neck in some strange manner and quickly bit down upon the neck of the last loyal Uchiha, sending a wave of pain throughout his body like never before. As soon as the offending serpent-like man left his upper body, a strange seal appeared on the back of his neck. His teammate Sakura was already at his side attending to the wound. However, both of them as well as their third teammate looked up in shock, seeing the heaven scroll they had been given at the beginning of the exam in the renegade Sannin's hands, only to watch it be ripped out of his hand by a strange bladed whip. All of them looked over to see both Team Black and Red standing on a nearby tree, overlooking each of them in a predatory way. Karen eventually caught the scroll without even trying to look it and gave a smile. Found one. But what do we do about him? The snake Sannin was seething with anger, knowing exactly who they all were. While he had seen them earlier at the entrance of the Forest of Death and in the exam room, he had secretly been hoping not to run into them at all, knowing that he had to keep his power at a certain level to remain hidden from the village's Anbu. Naruto and Tayuya turned to each other and shared a look that did not escape the snake Sannin's notice, as he then felt all the hairs on his body lift up as the two siblings turned back to look at him with wicked-looking smiles upon their faces and sad at the same time. Kill him. Right at that moment, all of them pulled out several handguns and pointed them at the snake Sannin's head and gave it a simple smile as they pulled the triggers, sending the projectiles at their intended target. If it had not been for Orochimaru's years of experience, he would have been finished off right then and there. The rogue Sannin ran as fast as he could, dodging projectiles every second, only to realize that several of the shinobi pirates had disappeared from view, only to barely dodge having his head cut from his body thanks to a swing from the Black Fox's blade known as the Maelstrom. The blade missed his neck only by a few centimeters and sliced through the trunk of a tree like a hot knife through butter, thanks to its wind affinity, which was only one extra part of the unique blade's power. The snake managed to jump to another branch, just managing to catch a glimpse of the fox leveling another pistol at his head. The snake quickly made a change in his destination, only to be shocked by what appeared to be a large monster of some kind trying to crush him with its huge fist. If that wasn't enough, he then saw the young girl with strange wraps around her body, who then quickly held up what could only be described as a cannon-shotgun hybrid kind of weapon that she pulled the trigger on, sending the large amount of shot of lead at its intended target. But with three opponents, it was much harder for him to dodge this time. As the shot rammed into his body, he felt most of his back ripped apart by the impact. To the surprise of many, including Team 7, he seemed to almost produce a new body directly out of his mouth, even down to the trails of drool and slime coming off him, leaving behind an empty husk, much like a snake sheds their skin. Sakura as well as her teammates were now transfixed upon what was happening and even a little grossed out at what the snake Sannin had just done. She then watched as the red-headed girl wearing glasses seemed to shoot out her strange whip-like blade at him, only for the Sannin to dodge her attack. She then literally flung herself to a higher branch thanks to her blade. And then within a second she made a movement of her blade, sending the whip-like blade cutting another branch off, sending it flying down at the recovering Sannin, who was just able to dodge in the nick of time. Orochimaru knew if this battle was to continue, he would be discovered by the Anbu and his plans would be ruined. He quickly managed to replace himself with a mud clone and made a run for it, hoping that everything would work out in the long run. The teams quickly dispatched the last clone and were absolutely surprised that he had gotten away so easily. They all then quickly regrouped and looked at the state of Team 7. Sasuke could barely maintain consciousness thanks to the tremendous amount of pain that he was experiencing at this time, only to see the Black Fox walk up to him and say, "I know that look, boy. He put that particular seal on your neck. What I'm about to do, boy, will help you, despite how it might not seem at first." With that said, he quickly punished the young Uchiha out cold with one punch. The pink-haired girl became quite angry at this until she saw the muzzle of the gun in her face and heard him spoke. "I know what I'm doing, girl. If he had remained awake, he might die in time. At least now he has a 50-50 chance of survival." She was truly surprised by his comment, but watched as he quickly took the earth scroll from his sister and threw it at them. Before she could even make any sound, he simply added, "Be happy that we are even giving you a scroll, girl. That heaven scroll, girl, is our compensation for helping you out at all. Be thinking us. And one more piece of advice." They all looked at him intently as he then said, "Make sure that that one-eye sensei of yours gets that thing sealed up as soon as possible." With that said, they then disappeared into the woods, leaving Team 7 behind with a different scroll than they had started with, but a scroll nonetheless. That's all for now. If you enjoy, then please like, share and do comments.